Welcome all to this special guest lecture. With me here today is Professor Dr. Mieke van Herreweghe. Professor van Herreweghe is Vice Rector at Ghent University in Belgium. Most of you are my students, so you know that I talk about Ghent all the time. So you already know what there are many things about Ghent University as such. Professor van Herreweghe used to be my professor as well, and I had a course with her on sign language while at Ghent. So she's also an expert on sign language in Europe and in Flanders. So as part of the subject of social linguistics, I'm happy to present Professor van Herreweghe. Please feel free to afterwards also ask questions, give your remarks. Professor van Herreweghe said that she's also very willing to answer other questions that you may have as well. So thank you all so very much for being here. Also special thanks to the members of the deaf community for coming to this special lecture on sign language. The floor is now for Professor van Herreweghe.
Okay, good afternoon. Very nice, very happy to be here. Oops, it's very loud as well. I've been told that you don't know too much about sign language in Europe or about the deaf communities. So I'm just going to start with the very basic things and see whether you know some answers to this. First question, is there one universal sign language or are there many different sign languages? What do you think? Who thinks there's one universal sign language, at least in Europe or maybe in the world? If you think so, raise your hand. Okay. 1, 2, can't really see your hands, they're very, so you're not really sure about it clearly. It's not as if, oh, I'm sure about this, it's like, maybe, okay. And people thinking that there are many different sign languages? Okay, the majority, right. So at least you know something about sign languages. It's frequently the case that people think that there is one universal sign language, and that is because people tend to talk about signing or using signs or whatever, gesturing basically. They don't know the difference between gesturing and signing. That this is what hearing people do, right? I mean, if you were to meet somebody from Belgium and you don't know any Dutch, and you don't know any English either, and you need to resort to gesture, and you are thirsty, how would you say that? I want to drink something. How would you show it in gestures? Can you try and do that? Someone over here as well? Very reluctant to do so. You'd be very thirsty if you can't do it in any gestures. Okay, most people did something like this, or whatever. Something like with holding a drink and putting it to the mouth. If you're hungry and you want to eat something and you're looking for a restaurant and you have to do it in gestures, how would you do this? Yeah, you can see slight differences. Some people do it like this. Some people go like this. So there are slight differences depending on how you eat, I suppose, or what it is that you think of when you eat. Yeah? If you are tired and you want to sleep somewhere, how would you do that? Yeah, most people take two hands and do it like that, right? Most people go like this. Okay. Those are gestures we all know and we all understand. I mean, if I do this, then you all know I want to say something about sleeping, whatever it is, but I want to say something about sleeping. So we all know these are fairly universal. They're not completely universal gestures, but fairly universal gestures, at least, say, in Europe, in America. Everybody would understand them. But those are gestures. Those are the things that we all use. And those are the things that we resort to when we try to communicate across language boundaries. If you want to communicate with somebody who doesn't know the language that we speak, and we don't have a common language, then we resort to gestures. And so people think that's the same as signing. It's not. It's completely not the same. There is no universal sign language. There's no such thing. What you can do in signing is you sort of resort to what we call international sign. This is the sign for it. This is what I just try to do when communicating with the deaf people here. You resort to some kind of international sign. It's some kind of, it's more gesture based, it's more American Sign Language based. You use a lot more pantomime, but I'll come back to that. You use more iconicity, you use more visual metaphors, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So there is that, and that's a type of accommodation that people use. I mean, that international sign is accommodating to somebody else. You both accommodate and try to communicate with each other, but you both don't use your own sign language. So a deaf signer from Belgium could communicate with a deaf signer here in Pristina. They would be able to use international sign. They would be able to use more visual imagery. But if a deaf signer here were to look at a conversation between two signers from Kosovo, they wouldn't understand them. That would be too difficult to understand. If you wanted to talk about, I don't know, a very hot political issue, that would be difficult as well. Yeah? So at a basic level it's possible, at a certain level it's possible, but not at a deep level. So this accommodation, as I say, when you accommodate to each other, happens through what we call pantomime. Now, pantomime is not signing. It's not a language. For pantomime, you use your whole body, right? I'll try and give you an example. If I do something in pantomime, I'm sure you'll all understand what I'm doing. And I'm not a mime artist. I'm certainly not a mime artist, but okay, I'll give it a try. What am I doing? Driving a car, yeah? That's pantomime. You're using your whole body to explain something. For signers, it's possible to resort to pantomime or to use things that are pantomime-like in their signing because it's the same, you use the same articulators. You use your hands, you use your face, you use part of your body. Now the difference with signing is that in signing that's far more abstract. If I were to do the same thing in Flemish Sign Language, the language that I know from home is Flemish Sign Language. It's not the same as the sign language used here. But if I were to do this in Flemish Sign Language, it would look like this. Far more difficult to understand, right? I mean, if I were to show that, you wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. Yeah? So this is signing, basically. That's a sign language. What you do is you use this part of the signing space, only this part, not your full body, no, only this part. And basically, your hands, your face, shoulders a little bit, your head tilt. But that's it. You don't use your full body. You don't start walking. You do this for walking. Yeah? You go, those are your two legs, basically. Yeah? But obviously, if you talk to somebody who doesn't know your sign language, you would start using your full body to explain things. Yeah? That would be possible. Signing is also, sign languages are visual gestural languages. We call them visual gestural languages. That means that you need to look at them and you need your manual articulators, facial articulators, etc., gestural, to communicate. Yeah? So we call them visual gestural languages. Now, visual gestural languages, and I'll come back to that later, tend to be far more simultaneous. You can do things simultaneously because you can look at things simultaneously. I can see all of you at the same time. Now, if you were to start talking at the same time, I wouldn't understand a thing of it, a bit of it. Yeah? So spoken languages tend to be organized sequentially. Sign languages are far more simultaneous. That also means that you can show forms more easily in a sign language than in a spoken language because they're visual languages. A computer, a laptop, has a certain shape, has a certain form, right? You can mimic that form, you can mimic that shape. So a laptop would be this. Yeah? That's a Flemish sign, at least, for laptop. I don't know what it is here. Laptop? So it's the same? Yeah, it's the same. Okay, it's the same sign. But a wall, for instance, that's also a very easy one. It's a very straightforward one. A wall is just a wall, or like this. You could go both. And that's just a wall. So you can mimic the shape of the wall because it has a shape, it has a form, it has a shape, and you can easily show that. The wall doesn't make any noise, right? So in a spoken language, it's far more difficult to mimic the noise objects make. In spoken languages, we have iconicity as well. Do you know what that's called in spoken languages? Iconicity in spoken languages, mimicking something you hear, mimicking the sound of something. Onomatopoeia, yes. Those are onomatopoeia. You've heard of onomatopoeia? Yeah? Okay. That's like cuckoo, mimicking the sound of a cuckoo. Those are onomatopoeia, or a choo-choo for a train. Those are onomatopoeia. That's the same thing. It's the same phenomenon. It's iconicity, but spoken language iconicity, because you refer to the sound things make, or objects make, or people make, or whatever, animals make, or whatever. Because objects don't really make much sound. But they do have a shape, so it's a lot easier to use iconicity in sign languages. So it's the same phenomena, it's the same underlying phenomenon, only because they're visual languages and you can mimic shapes of things, it's a lot more frequent to do that. Now, iconicity doesn't mean that everything is the same in all sign languages, right? To give you one example, water, for instance, in Flemish Sign Language, water is signed like this. Any idea what that would refer to? Yeah, water coming out of a tap. Yeah, that's it. It's the water, because we have taps and water coming out of a tap. In the Netherlands, the sign for water is this. Refers to the sea, yeah? So water in the sea. I don't know what it is here. Now that there are deaf people here, I might be able to ask it. Water, this? Okay, something you drink. So it's something you drink here. Yeah, that's the sign here. So those are all iconic signs. They all have a level of iconicity. Only it's culturally bound. Yeah, there are cultural differences linked to cultural differences in general, but also because they've gone through a different conventionalization process. You have certain signs that emerge somewhere, and then the whole community decides to adopt that sign, and then it becomes conventional, and then you have a conventional sign. That occurs within a community. It doesn't occur all the way in the world, and it's not the same everywhere in the world. It occurs within a community. So that's why you have differences, even though things are iconic. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah? So that you can have you can refer to different aspects of the form or of the shape of something. So it's still iconic, but the cultural conventionalization can be different in different sign languages. And that's why you end up with different signs. Now, what happens with people or deaf people communicating with each other across sign language borders, what happens is that they use more of these iconic signs, and they frequently know more iconic signs. So you can, for instance, use 2-3 signs after each other if you try to communicate with somebody from another sign language community. So rather than just saying water, you would go water, 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 and hoping that one of them would be a sign that somebody else can understand. Or you would actually mimic it more. You would use more pantomime. You would go to a glass or something and then say this. That's also possible, yeah? So that people would understand. This iconicity, as I said, can also be in movement, for instance. Yeah? If I would ask you the sign for a bicycle, how would you sign a bicycle? Any ideas? How would you do that if you... I can see some people doing this, I can see some people doing this, and some people doing this. The Flemish Sign Language for bike is this. I think it's the same here, I just saw you do that. That refers to the pedals, yeah? That refers to the pedals moving about, yeah? Moving around. That's still clear. Now, the Flemish sign for coffee, for instance. For coffee, how do you sign coffee? Coffee like this? No. Coffee like this, okay. I don't know what that is. Yeah. It's more like an espresso type of coffee, yeah. Yeah, okay. Flemish sign for coffee is completely different. It's this one. Do you still remember that? To ground coffee, yeah, with an old-fashioned type of coffee grinder. Now you still recognize that. I'm not sure whether in 100 years' time people would still recognize that. Because, yeah, those things disappear, right? So I don't know whether in 100 years' time people will still know that that's what it refers to. So right now it's still iconic, but maybe in future it won't be iconic anymore. We think that, for instance, the Flemish sign for woman is, there are different etymological, there are different explanations for its origin. This is the Flemish, well, one of the Flemish signs for woman is this. Yeah? Now, some people say that refers to the fact that the skin of a woman is soft, as opposed to the beard of a man, which is not so soft, or the prickly skin of a man, which is not so soft, and that's why this is soft. Yeah? Some people say it refers to the fact that in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century, women, at least in our part of the world, I don't know whether they did that here as well, used to wear these cotton little hats, and you had a string underneath your chin, and you would bind it here. You know, these cotton type of, white cotton type of, hats. I don't know what else to call them. A bonnet. Yeah, and then that would be the string. It refers to the string that you have here. That's a different explanation. I have no idea which one is true. But those are two explanations for it. Right now, clearly, it used to be an iconic sign, just we don't know anymore right now what the iconicity is behind it. This gets lost. People just don't know anymore. You don't have to know also to understand this. I mean, a small deaf kid, for instance, could ask for milk. In Flemish Sign Language, milk is like this. Yeah, it's like milking a cow. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old hasn't milked a cow, but still does this sign. Yeah, so for the kid itself, may not be iconic, but it knows the sign and it uses the sign. So the iconicity was there in origin, but it gets lost. Yeah, throughout the history of a language. We also know that sometimes these signs develop further. There is, for instance, a sign in American Sign Language for a home is this. Yeah, that's a sign for home in American Sign Language. That came originally from, this is the place where I sleep and eat, and that has, over the years, developed into this. Yeah, so it's not sleep and eat anymore, it's just this. This one hand shape is being used now for the two contact points. Yeah, so you can see it loses its iconicity as well. Yeah? So you can see that sign languages develop over time, and there's evolution as well. And yeah, That's why there are differences also between different sign languages. I'll come back to that in a minute. That also means that there are language families, sign language families. Again, I don't know too much about the sign language used here, but I know that in Flanders, Flemish Sign Language belongs to what we call the Old French Sign Language family. It goes back to Old French Sign Language, and Old French Sign Language is sort of the mother language, developed into the current French Sign Language, developed into Flemish Sign Language, also American Sign Language. American Sign Language also goes back to the Old French Sign Language. But for instance, you would think, since I think the majority of you are students of English, that's why I thought this might be interesting for you as well. You have American Sign Language going back, being part of the Old French Sign Language family, but there is British Sign Language. British Sign Language is a completely different sign language. The two sign languages are really completely different. It's very difficult to understand each other. They belong to completely different families. For me, as as somebody who knows Flemish Sign Language, American Sign Language is understandable to some extent. I mean, not if it's fast and if it's with a lot of finger spelling, but to some extent I can understand bits and pieces of it. British Sign Language is like, I don't understand a thing of that. It's completely different. Yeah. So it's a completely different sign language family, even though the spoken languages in the two countries, in Britain and in the States, are the same. Yeah. So that brings me to my next question. Are sign languages translations of spoken languages, or do they have their own grammatical rules? So who thinks that sign languages are to some extent related to spoken languages? Yeah, you should know by now. I've just given it away. I shouldn't have done that. Who thinks they have their own grammatical rules? Okay, yeah, majority by now. Good. And these grammatical rules are quite different from spoken language, the spoken language grammatical rules, at least from the spoken language surrounding the sign language. Yeah? They're really quite different. Because sign language, as I said, are visually organized. They are visual gestural languages with a lot of simultaneity. I'll give you one example, or I'll try to give you one example. You can use your head. I'll explain it first, I'm sorry. And once I give the example, I'll tell you. You can use your head, you can use your hands, you can use basically your body as well, but that's not used all that frequently, at the same time, right? So I can use my hands to sign something, and I can use my head at the same time to negate what I'm saying, for instance, yeah? By shaking my head like this, at least in Flemish Sign Language, I say it's not the case, yeah? I can ask a question at the same time by, for instance, by raising my eyebrows, yeah? I can raise my eyebrows and my chin a little bit down, and that means that I'm now asking a yes-no question. Yeah? I'm asking, is it true or is it not true? Yes or no. I'm expecting a yes or a no as a reply. I can furrow my brows like this, yeah? And then I'm asking an open question, the WH question we would say in English, yeah? An open question. I'm asking for information, yeah? That's like this. For the rest, my hands can do exactly the same thing. So I could say, for instance, in Flemish Sign Language, the film begins now, for instance. In Flemish Sign Language, that would be film begins, yeah? Film begin. So that, just in a statement, that's the film begins. Oh yeah, now, sorry, I said now. I'm sorry. Now the film begins. And now the time element always has to come first. So now film begins, yeah? If I want to turn that into a question, does the film begin now? All I do is raise my eyebrows, lower my chin a little bit, and say, now film begin, okay? This is a little bit like intonation in spoken languages. Yeah? If I want to negate that, the film doesn't begin. All I do, my hands again do exactly the same. My hands go, now film begin. Yeah? But my face goes like this, or my head goes like this. Yeah? So then I say, now film begin. Yeah? The film doesn't begin now. Yeah? So that's simultaneity. Yeah? You're using your head at the same time as your hands. but you give grammatical information on your head through simultaneity. A very complex example, for instance, another example that I could give you, in grammar, first person space would be your own body, second person space would be in front of you by looking at it as well, so it's the combination of eye contact and place over there, and third person space would not looking at it, and it's over there. Yeah? So very, very basic. If I say I give something to you, I can do it just like this. I give something to you. Yeah? I give something to you. Or if I want to say you give something to him, I go like this. Yeah? You start in second space area and you end in third space area. Yeah? You, him. So the only way in which you mark second person and third person is by the beginning and the end of the sign. You can say I give you. It's possible to do that by pointing at yourself and pointing at you. It's possible, but you don't have to. You can just simply go like this. I give you. Yeah? Or you can simply go he gives him, or you give him, or they give each other, or I give all of you, or whatever. So you can see this is also by using space, first person, second person, third person, by using space. That's your grammatical aspects. You don't have to use separate signs for that. If you combine all of that, for instance, I could use one sign. Hold on, now I have to think. To invite, this in Flemish Sign Language, to invite, this is the sign to invite. Yeah? So that means that he invites me would be like this. Yeah? That person invites me. Okay. If I now have one sentence like, hasn't he invited you? Maybe you already know how to do this now. Hasn't he invited you? You've got negation, and you've got a question, and you've got the he and the you. Yeah? So you can put all of that in one sign. Yeah? It would be something like, let me think. Yeah, can you see that? Yeah, so you've got that one sign. You start with the you ending with the him. Yeah, he has invited you. So yeah, you start with you ending in the him. Negative, hasn't. And then the question, right? Eyebrows raised and chin a little bit down. Hasn't he invited you? One sign for a full sentence in English or in Dutch. It's the same. It's a full sentence. So you've got lots and lots of simultaneity. Yeah. That also means that the sentence grammar is completely different. To give you another example, they can use the use of space. I already explained that. But for instance, most sign languages use what we call classifiers. That's a shape referring, it's sort of pronouns, basically, yeah? But they have a shape. Pronouns with a shape. Those are classifiers. To give you one example, the car drives through the tunnel. Yeah? The car drives through the tunnel. In the Flemish Sign Language, it looks like this. You have a tunnel, you have a car, and the car drives through the tunnel. Yeah? So you first say the thing that can't move, tunnel. This is Flemish Sign Language grammar. First, the thing that doesn't move, the tunnel. Then the thing that does move, the car. And then you use a classifier construction for the car. It's a pronoun, basically, but with a shape. It's flat. Yeah? The car is more flat than it is high, so this is a flat car. And then the tunnel. Yeah? And you have to do it in that order. You can't do it the other way around. You can't go like this, and then tunnel, and then car. Doesn't make any sense. That's grammatically incorrect. Yeah? So you see you have a grammatical order as well. Yeah? But the grammatical order is completely different from the way in which you say it in English or in Dutch, because in Dutch it's the same as in English. The car drives through the tunnel. You use different word order, right? Those are some examples. So separate grammatical constructions. When I said simultaneity, you also have simultaneity even in the phonological system. Now, you probably think it's very strange to talk about a phonological system and a sign language. That seems to be strange for many people. Why would you talk about a phonological system in a sign language? Remember, I've been told that you also have linguistics, sociolinguistics, but also some basics in linguistics. Remember the definition of a phoneme. I don't know whether you remember that or whether you know that. A phoneme is the smallest meaning distinguishing element in a language. Yeah, and I see you all nodding, so you all know that. Okay, good. The smallest meaning distinguishing element in a language. It doesn't say anything about a sound. It says this is the smallest meaning distinguishing element in the language. And so you have minimal pairs, right? Minimal pairs like pan and pen. You know it's different because the vowel is different. The P and the N are the same, but the vowel is different. So the vowel A or E are phonemes because they distinguish in meaning. By themselves, they don't have any meaning. Yeah? The A or the E by themselves doesn't have any meaning. Well, signs are made up of 4, 5, some people say 6 parameters. And these parameters are basically phonemes. The parameters are hand shape, so the shape of the hand, or both hands, yeah, hand shape. The place of articulation, is it on the head, on the face, somewhere on the face, on the body, in neutral signing space? Somewhere within this space, usually. You have a few signs that are below, but most signs are within this space. You have movement. Is it a path movement or a hand internal movement, for instance? You can have hand internal movement, or you can have a movement from one place to another. Yeah, that's a path movement. And then orientation of the hand itself. Is the palm directed that way or this way or that way or that way? And the hand and the finger orientation, up, front, back, down. So all of those are what we call those are the phonemes of a sign. Only they occur simultaneously. It's not as if you first have a hand shape and then a movement and then a place of articulation and then an orientation. No, they occur simultaneously. Yeah, that's why they're also organized simultaneously. I mean, signs are made up of components that are organized simultaneously. To give you some examples of minimal pairs in Flemish Sign Language, we have, for instance, a sign for exam would be this, and sports would be this. Yeah, there's no iconicity in it, basically. That's exam and that's sports. So what's the difference? Just the movement. Yeah, orientation is the same, hand shape is the same, place of articulation is the same. It's just the movement that's different. Yeah, so that's a minimal pair. You have, for instance, sports and running. Yeah, running like this and sport like this. So the movement is the same, orientation is the same, place of articulation is the same, but the hand shape differs. Rather than the thumbs up, you have the index fingers up. Yeah? Those are some examples. So you can see we have minimal pairs in sign languages as well. Yeah? The thing that you all know from spoken languages, well, that exists in sign languages as well. But the minimal pairs are organized, well, the parameters of the phonological system are organized simultaneously, not sequentially. There is 1/5 parameter that is usually added, and that's what we call the non-manual parameter, because you can also have information on the face by you have grammatical information on the face. I told you that, the eyebrows, for instance, and the shaking the head, negation and questioning, interrogation. But you can also have lexical information on the face. One example in Flemish Sign Language, one extremer example in Flemish Sign Language of a sign that doesn't even have any manual parameter, so there's no manual aspects of it, it's only non-manual, is this sign. I don't know whether you can see that. I just put my tongue in my cheek. Can you see that? It's here now. So this sign means menstruation. It's a bit of a taboo sign. You don't even use your hands for it. You just use your face for it. I have my menstruation, yeah? Flemish Sign Language. Again, I don't know about other sign languages, Flemish Sign Language. Yeah? But that's an extreme aspect of it. But I mean, if you were to use that sign and you were to analyze it phonologically, you don't have a hand shape, a place, well, you do have a place of articulation. You don't have a movement, you don't have an orientation. It's basically only your facial, your face that does something. So you can have lexical facial aspects as well. You have, for instance, the sign for thin, yeah? Very thin or very thin, depending on how you sign this. You have thin, just ordinarily thin, is this. But very, very thin would be, yeah? So you inhale, if you like, your cheeks to have, and it's necessary. You need to do this. You can't just do, that doesn't make sense. You have to go, yeah? It's part of the sign, yeah? So it's really part of that. So you have your non-manual aspects as well, yeah? That's your fifth parameter. But we don't know too much about that, so there's not a lot of research on that. Now, what is interesting, very interesting about sign languages is, at least in Cuxac, who's a French researcher, in Cuxac's terms, sign languages are heterogeneous systems. We call them heterogeneous systems because you have gestural elements in it and you have linguistic elements. Yeah? The examples I've just given to you are clearly linguistic, you know, the grammatical rules, lexical rules, phonological rules. We have there are phonological rules also. I mean, there are certain signs that you can't, that if people see them, at least in Flemish Sign Language, they would say, ooh, that looks odd. It's certainly not something that I would think belongs to my sign language. That means that there are phonological rules. Like in English, you would never say stop, whatever, stop. In English, the sta at the beginning of a word doesn't make sense in English. Everybody would immediately say, oh, that's not an English word. Yeah? That's a phonological rule. We have these phonological rules in sign language as well. In Flemish Sign Language, you would, for instance, never do this. Ooh, I can't even do it. You would never do this, yeah? Having your middle finger over your ring finger. It's odd. You never do this in Flemish Sign Language. So if you have a sign with this hand shape, they would immediately say, that's not part of my sign language. Yeah? So those are all linguistic. Yeah? But then you also have certain gestural elements as well. What happens, for instance, if a signer talks about a conversation they've had with another signer? What they can do is they basically go into direct speech mode, I call that. You immediately sort of take on the persona of the person signing. And you do it by shifting your body. Yeah? It's a body shift. Yeah? So when you say that last night you had a conversation and whoever, John asked me, how are you doing? Then you could say something like, and John, the name sign, yeah, you have to use a name sign, which I don't know right now, so just a name sign, John, and then you shift your body, and you look in that direction, and you say, how are you doing? This is a very basic sign. How are you doing? Just eyebrows up. This is really a very basic sign in many sign languages. Eyebrows up, and just the thumb up. How are you doing? And then I would reply and do the body shift, and then it's me replying, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. So the body shift tells you this is the one person asking something, or it's the other person asking something. Yeah? It's me saying something, or it's the other person saying something. Now it's me saying something. So this way, in that type of what you do, you show a conversation without each time having to say, John says, I say, John says, I say. You just simply go this, and then you explain the conversation. Am I making sense? Yeah? Okay. This is more gestural than linguistic. is not very linguistic, because it's not discrete. You can't say, I move 1 centimeter and then I'm John, or I have to move 5 centimeters before I'm John. It's not discrete. I mean, you can't really put something on it. So it's more gestural than linguistic. And you can use more of these types of signing systems, if you like, the more iconic signs, more of these classifier constructions as well. And then you're in a showing mood, so you show things. But you can also use a telling mood. You could say, John says, how are you? And I say, I'm fine. So you could do it like that by using signs all the time as well. Yeah? So that would be the telling mood. Whereas the showing mood is far more gestural. Yeah? That's why we think right now, not all researchers. There's a lot of discussion about this in the sign language linguistic community. But I believe that there are heterogeneous systems. So you have a bit of gestural elements in it, and you have a bit of linguistic elements in it, and it's more. I believe it's more on a continuum. And you have the continuum, on the one hand, complete gesture, on the other hand, completely linguistic, and then a number of elements in between. Like the fact that you can use space for first, second, or third person space. That's somewhere in between linguistic and gesture. Because again, it's not really discrete. I mean, I can talk to you now, and I'm addressing you, and so I'm now pointing at your direction. This means you. But if I go like this, that also means you, because I'm now looking at you. It also means you. So I've pointed there, it means you, and I've pointed there, and it means you. It's the combination with the eye gaze, but still. So that's a little bit gestural, rather than really, really linguistic. You see what I mean? So they're mixed. It's something that in spoken language research we overlook. In spoken language research, if you do research on spoken languages, you frequently do research on the written language. You use written texts to do your research on. And then you overlook so many things. I mean, as a sign language linguist, to me, it's always remarkable that you don't look at the body language, the eye gaze, what happens with gestural support of what people say. Now, when people say, I've seen him there, yeah? The there means something. It's different from there. It's the same word, but by adding the gesture there, it means something else from there, right? Yeah. And in spoken language research, that's frequently overlooked. So the multimodality in spoken language research is really frequently overlooked. I don't know whether you take that into account or not, but that means that if you want to do conversation analysis, yeah, of a certain conversation, I think really if you want to do a thorough conversation analysis, you need video data, because you need to know how people are seated, how they're looking at each other, what gestural support they give, rather than just looking at the transcript of the text. Yeah? And it's the same in sign languages. In well, you can't do any sign language research without video data. Yeah, obviously. You need the video data. I mean, you can't just do it on paper. But still, there are also gestural elements in it. Yeah? There are even just common gestures in sign languages as well. You can reply if somebody says, do you know what time it is? And you can reply. You could say, I don't know. It's the same in spoken languages, right? You could say, I don't know. You can also say, I don't know. I don't know. I know not I. Sorry. I know not I. I don't know. Yeah, that's also possible. But you can just simply say, I don't know. This one is purely gestural. This one, I don't know, is clearly Flemish Sign Language. Yeah? So you can use the one or you can use the other. Both are equally possible, but the one is gestural, the other is linguistic. Yeah? So this link of gesture and linguistic is there in spoken languages as well, only it's hardly ever researched. People are not aware of it, or they don't research it at least. Right, now one other thing. Where do you think deaf children learn how to sign? Any ideas on that? Yes? Okay, so either in a course or from the parents, yeah? We're really talking about small children. I'm really talking about really small children. I'm not sure whether you take small children to courses to study things. I mean, it would be different for you. You can study a sign language in a course, that's clear enough. But a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, you don't really take them to courses, right? I mean, you don't do that. But from the parents, okay, how many of you think that they would learn it from their parents in first instance? Right, the majority, yeah, okay, many, many people. Let me tell you. Oh, sorry.
Can I add something, or maybe can I add a question to this? How would it be in a situation if parents are not deaf, but the children is?
Yep.
How will the children learn sign language?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Now, the question is, I don't know whether people heard it. The question is, what happens with deaf children who have hearing parents? Not all deaf children have deaf parents. What happens with deaf children with hearing parents? Let me tell you something. Jeremy Shine talks about the 90-90-90 rule, saying that 90, actually in the Western world, 95% of deaf children have hearing parents. You just thought the majority would have would have deaf parents? It's a small minority that has deaf parents. 90 to 95% of deaf children have hearing parents. Yeah? So the fact that it's hereditary is only really a small part of the deaf community. Most deaf children, I mean, the large majority has hearing parents. Hearing parents, like you all, who don't know how to sign. Yeah? So they can't teach their deaf children how to sign because they themselves don't know it. So that means that they need to learn it first. But you all know that you don't learn a language in a year. You can learn something in a year, that's true, but not a fully fledged language in a year. That's not possible. So by the time that you know that your child is deaf, and by the time that you've started learning the local sign language, wherever you are, yeah, there's no way that by the time that kid is, say, 2 years old, you're a fluent signer. I mean, I'm sure you'll know some signs and you can learn some signing, etc. But you could never be a language model. You couldn't be a linguistic model. Yeah? Not like I would assume your parents were for you. Yeah? They were really a linguistic model. For deaf children with hearing parents, you can't expect hearing parents to be linguistic models. I mean, that's not reasonable for them. Yeah? For people to ask them to do that. Mind you, while I'm at it, it's also interesting to know that 90% of deaf people have a deaf partner. So when they can choose, they choose a deaf partner most of the time. Whereas 90% of deaf people have hearing children. Yeah, so that's the 90-90-90 rule. 90%, if you can't choose anything. I mean, you can't choose who your parents are, and you can't choose who your children are, right? So 90% there is mixed. 90% has hearing parents, 90% has hearing children. But once you can choose, 90% of people in the deaf community would go for a deaf partner. There are exceptions, but 90% goes for a deaf partner. By the way, the 90% hearing children, they're called CODAs. A CODA, child of deaf adult. You may have noticed that this was in the news this week. Don't know whether you've seen it, anybody? Yeah, I hear somebody shouting, Oscar, yeah. There's a new film called CODA. The title of the film is CODA, means child of deaf adult. Just won an Oscar that's, for a film. Ah, we've got the same sign, CODA. That's the sign for CODA as well. So I'm sure it'll be in the cinemas everywhere pretty soon. You can have a look at it. So, if deaf children, I mean, there are a group of deaf children who've got deaf parents, sometimes even deaf grandparents and deaf great-grandparents. These are the important people in the deaf community. They're the leaders, frequently the leaders in the deaf community, because they go way back to in the deaf community. They have deaf culture coming with them from when they were born. They live through deaf culture. They live it at home. Yeah? So these are the strong, if I say, deaf leaders frequently. I don't know whether that's the case here, but in Flanders at least, and I know in the Netherlands it's the same, in France it's the same. They're really the deaf leaders. It's the same here, yeah. Because they're very good signers, because they've learned it from home. They've received lots and lots of information from their parents. At the breakfast table, at the dinner table, you talk and you sign with each other, and there's a lot of informal information that goes around, because the communication is easy and is open. Yeah? Whereas deaf children of hearing parents, it's far more difficult. I mean, these hearing parents can learn how to sign, but it doesn't always come that natural. So it's not always that easy to start signing at the breakfast table or at the dinner table. There are differences. Yeah, they don't. I mean, they learn it as well. If you have a hearing parent who chooses to raise their children in the sign language, in the local sign language, they would learn the sign languages as well. But they're not as proficient as deaf children from deaf parents. Yeah, they're far more proficient. I mean, the difference is big. So where do they have to learn it? Where do these deaf children with hearing parents, where can they find their linguistic models, their linguistic role models? In the deaf schools. Yeah? The deaf schools are the cradles of deaf culture, including the local sign language, obviously. Language is a big part of a culture, right? So the deaf schools are extremely important, or were at least extremely important. Now there are major changes in that nowadays, because nowadays more and more deaf children go to what we call hearing schools, go to regular schools, sometimes with interpreters, sometimes without an interpreter. Also nowadays more and more deaf children get a cochlear implant. That's a cochlear implant, it's a kind of implant. Deaf children get it when they're very, very young. They get an implant, and the idea is then that they don't need any sign language anymore. At least that's what medical doctors would frequently say, that they don't, not always, but frequently say that they don't need an implant anymore, and that you can raise them completely orally, completely in the spoken language, that you don't need the sign language anymore. This is a highly controversial topic in the deaf communities around the world. It's a highly controversial topic because, I mean, imagine you can't think, this is in the idea, in the philosophy, that a deaf community with its sign language is just a language minority. Yeah? In a country, it's just a linguistic minority. Yeah? We don't talk about disability, or you don't talk about a handicap. You look at them as a linguistic minority, yeah? Because they have their own language, they have their own culture within their community. Yeah? So it's basically a linguistic minority. If you look at it from that perspective, and then there's somebody who comes and tells you, well, we'll give you some kind of implant, and then you don't need that minority anymore, you don't need that linguistic group anymore, you can live in the majority culture. That's basically what you say to people, right? So it's very controversial. Many deaf people and many people in the deaf community feel that a cochlear implant disregards their own culture, yeah? Because you don't accept deaf culture as it is, because you don't accept sign language as it is. I know this is very difficult to understand, and I'm just saying this because I think it's something that you can talk about later on. It's something that many people find very difficult to understand, because if you think about it from the perspective of a disability, then it's the resolution of a disability, right? I mean, they're not deaf anymore. But if you think about it from the perspective of culture, then they're not deaf anymore. They don't really belong to deaf culture anymore. Yeah? Some people even say that's a genocide. Yeah? They go as far as saying that it's a genocide. It's very, very, very far going, but still. So there's a lot of controversy about this. There's a lot of debate about this within the deaf community as well, and in the medical departments dealing with cochlear implants as well. They're very much aware of that it's tricky, that it's something that you need to guide or need to give a lot of support if you want to do that. The problem, I think, with it basically is that people, and that's the case in many countries, I don't know about here, but it's the case in many countries, that people who choose or who go for a cochlear implant, that they are being told that they can't use sign language anymore. They don't have to use sign language anymore. They can just raise their children monolingually in the spoken language. Now that's the problem, I think. I mean, from a linguistic point of view, it just doesn't make any sense. Raise your children bilingually, I would say. Yeah? From a sociolinguistic point of view, even more so. Raise the children bilingually. Use both the spoken language and the sign language so that they are familiar with both communities, so that they feel at home in both communities. Because now what we're doing is raising a number of deaf children with hearing parents, feeling at home to some extent, not completely, because cochlear implant, they're good, but they're not the same as being completely hearing. At least you become hard of hearing. Yeah? So you're raised into the hearing world, but basically you're still deaf, and you're not raised into the deaf world. Yeah? So you're missing out, I believe. I mean, you're really missing out. So that, I think, is the major issue with that. But okay, this is stuff for a lot of discussion. And I'm going to give you another controversial example. While I'm at it, I might just as well do that. I've been told at some point by a deaf person, to me, he said, to me it's like living in America, in the States, and in the States you have a white majority and a black minority, still at the moment, I think. It might be changing pretty soon at some point, but at the moment you still have a white majority and a black minority. It would be as if you tell parents, black parents, if they have a black child, you can give your child an implant and it'll become white. Okay? Nobody would think of doing that, right? But they make that type of comparison, and I can fully understand that, because you don't, I mean, you then belong, or you're then part of the white majority, which would be probably a lot better for career perspectives, for whatever, for moving on in life. It's probably better to do that, that's true. But you lose your identity, right? You lose your own identity. And that's what this is all about. That's why it's interesting for sociolinguists to study this as well. The link between language, culture, identity. So very strong, so very interesting. Anyhow, back to deaf schools. If you have questions about this, just ask. If you disagree, that's also fine. Just tell me, that's fine, no problem with that. And if you have any questions about this, go, shoot. Yes? Learning a spoken language. The question is, do you think if you raise your children bilingually that the sign language gets in the way of learning the spoken language, yeah? Of learning your Albanian or whatever as a first spoken language? We know from... Yeah, when they get a cochlear implant. It's true, when they get a cochlear implant... Sorry, you didn't get the question? Okay, I'm sorry, I'll repeat it. If you raise a child with a cochlear implant bilingually, isn't using the sign language detrimental or negative, or has a negative impact on learning the spoken language, learning Albanian? Yeah, that's your question, right? Yeah. It's true that if your child gets a cochlear implant, you need a lot of language therapy. You need a lot of spoken language therapy. That's true. A lot of the time goes to language therapy. There's a lot of time for that. That's true. And people do that because you're sort of immersed in that medical, the whole medical sphere around it, and you have to do this. It's part of it. So you have to go to a language therapist or whatever, a speech therapist, whatever they are. To train the spoken language. That's absolutely true. But at the same time, you could do something similar with the deaf community. You could also join activities in the deaf community. You could also, I don't know about the system here, but we have, for instance, daycare centers. Yeah? You could send your child to a daycare center with a deaf signer. Yeah? So that there, the linguistic model would be signing. And you can still have both. That's not a problem. We know from the literature, but it's very difficult to convince people of that. But we know all the literature that we have points to the fact that learning a sign language is not detrimental for learning a spoken language. On the contrary, learning a sign language, if you learn both languages at the same time, the sign language really supports the spoken language. We know that deaf children from deaf parents who have sign language at home are the better readers. They're the ones that read better than deaf children from hearing parents, because they have had a solid base, a sign language base, to build the second language on. And you need a solid first language base. And the first language base for deaf children, a sign language, is easier because it's completely accessible. You can see it, so it's completely accessible. Whereas the spoken language, even with a cochlear implant, is not completely accessible. So you need that solid base first, and then you can build the spoken language on top of that. What happens with people who don't have that solid base? It's better now because there's a lot more language therapy, but I did my research in the 80s and in the 90s, in the 1990s, towards my PhD research was about deaf children's knowledge of Dutch syntax and reading and writing. I had both read them texts and then ask them questions about this, and then write them short essays. And then I analyzed them. I had, I think about 15% of the kids that I tested, and these were all kids with normal intelligence, but the ones that didn't have a sign language at home, the ones that had the sign language at home all had good Dutch, no problem. But the ones that didn't have a sign language at home, they were sort of semi-bilingual. They were not very fluent in the spoken language and not very fluent in the sign language. So they didn't really have a solid base in either language, and that is a risk. I think that's a big risk, because then you become semi-bilingual, and that's something you don't want to have. We do know that if you start with a solid sign language base and you build a spoken language on top of that, that is no problem, that works. It's perfectly possible. We know that from a lot of research that has been done, but still in education, in deaf education, many people still believe that that's not the case. They still believe I have to spend so much time on the spoken language and focus on that spoken language because it's so difficult, because it's not completely accessible. So I have to spend all my time on the spoken language, and then they disregard the sign language, and then you end up with semi-bilinguals. There was a question over there as well.
Mic is not working, but
yeah, it does.
I had a question about the codas, the children that have none of their parents are really talking, but the children are fluent in a language. How do you think that would go? I know I have an example of a family that none of the parents talk. They were born deaf, but the children are fluent in Albanian, and I didn't quite grasp how could they do that. They don't have a sign language and they don't have implants. They can't afford it. So how do you think that would go?
But these are hearing children, right? The codas are hearing children. Yeah.
Yes,
so they don't need
children.
an implant.
They
are
don't,
hearing.
but how do they understand?
I know it's a tricky one. One thing that we also know from the literature is that you have linguistic role models. Frequently it's your parents. Very frequently it's your parents. So they would probably learn how to sign from their parents. Codas, if the parents sign, because not all deaf parents sign to their hearing children. But if deaf parents sign to their hearing children, they are codas, and the codas would become fluent signers. And that's not a problem. That's not an issue, because they learn it from the parents. We also know that interaction with peers is extremely important. So, yeah, obviously, if they don't have any other peers, hearing or deaf, whatever, but if they don't have any contact with other peers, they wouldn't learn any other language. But that's why it's very important to have contact with peers, with other children. We know that codas tend to learn the spoken language at school or preschool or daycare, whatever, wherever it is that you send them, so that they have contact with other children, sometimes with children that are a little bit older, that can be linguistic role models. We know that the influence of, and this is something that in the literature is frequently, a lot of the literature is about interaction between a child and parent. Yeah? There's not so much literature about the interaction between child and other child, no, or between siblings. We know that that is extremely important as well. We know that from literature on bilinguals in general, what frequently happens is that siblings among each other use the school language. Whatever the home language is, with their parents, they would use another, the language of their parents, but among each other, they would use the school language. So if you have hearing children with deaf parents, with their parents, they would sign. With their hearing brothers and sisters, they would speak, because this is what they do at school, because they go to hearing school, right? They go to a regular school. Yeah? So this is what they do at school. So that's how they learn how to sign. And basically it's the same for deaf children of hearing parents, but the other way around. Deaf children of hearing parents learn how to sign at school from their deaf siblings, because at school some of them will have deaf parents, 10% more or less will have deaf parents, so there will be some very good linguistic examples. So they will learn how to sign from their deaf peers at school, and then at home, and then in language therapy, they will learn the spoken language. So that's a type of bilingualism. It's the same for spoken language bilingualism. Yeah, you have spoken language bilingualism with a different language at home than at school. That's also possible if it's well organized. It's perfectly possible to become fluently bilingual in both languages. If it's not so well organized, it's sometimes tricky. You sometimes end up with mixing languages, but if it's well organized, then it can be a very, very rich experience for children to become bilingual or even multilingual. Yeah? I know children who've got one language with a mother, another language with a father, and then a third language with brothers and sisters, because that's a school language. They're perfectly trilingual, perfectly possible. Children are very flexible and can do that. And the one language is not detrimental to the other. So it's the same with signing. It doesn't matter. I mean, the signing itself is not detrimental to learning the spoken language. Is that an answer to your question? Yeah. Any other questions? Go ahead. I mean, yes?
I was wondering if there is any kind of, and I'm not sure, is there any kind of stratification when it comes to signing? Like, is there any kind of social classification in how well you sign, or whether there is more, is there more respect for someone who uses more of the signing and less of the gesturing, or the other way around?
Question is there social stratification in sign language varieties, basically? in people who use more pure sign language and people who use more sign language influenced by the spoken language? Yeah? Very interesting question. Very tricky question. Very, very difficult to answer that. We need more research for that. What you see, what you hear when people talk to you, I've heard both. I'll put it like that. I've talked to deaf people who tell me, that's that's pure sign language. That really is. It's somebody who really is a very fluent signer, and it's a pure sign language, and they use, especially for people on stage who are, I don't know, deaf comedians, for instance. There are a good many deaf comedians and deaf comedians on stage who are very fluent in both visual imagery and signing, so they use a lot of this iconicity and a lot of these visual showing aspects. People look up at deaf comedians who can do that, because they're very, very good at it. So that's clearly, I'm not saying this real social stratification, but at least they look up to somebody who can sign like that. Maybe it's also because, they play with the language, right? I mean, deaf comedians would play with language, and we tend to look up to people who can play with language and who can do that. I've also done research in the Flemish deaf community in the Flemish, in Flanders, we have what we call Flemish Sign Language, but Flemish Sign Language at the moment is not a standardized language. So we don't have a standardized Flemish Sign Language. That doesn't exist. In Flanders, I just said that the deaf schools are the cradle of deaf culture. In Flanders we have 5 deaf schools in 5 different provinces, and each deaf school has a variety. It's more like, we call it a regional variety. It's more like a dialect, but it's, well, comparable to a dialect. So we've got 5, say, regiolects, or 5 dialects linked to the 5 deaf schools. Yeah? The differences are not all that big. I mean, 70% of the signs are the same, 30% are slightly different or completely different. Yeah? When I say completely different, I say, for instance, the sign for sugar in West Flanders is this, sugar in West Flanders, so one province of Flanders, sugar. In Flemish Brabant it's this, sugar. It's a completely different sign, right? I mean, there's no resemblance between this and this. They're completely different signs. Yeah? But the sign for water would be the same everywhere. Or the sign for red would be the same everywhere. This is red. Yeah? Yes?
Is there a possibility that one sign can be something else?
In another variety? Is it possible that one sign has another meaning and another variety? Yes, that's possible. The sign for Tuesday in East Flanders is the same as Wednesday in Flemish Brabant. Really tough. So what people always do, they always say, give the mouthing, always give the Dutch word with it. They would say dinsdag or woensdag, so that you can clearly see on the mouth which meaning it has. Yes, but that occurs, but those are examples. I mean, we can all give some examples. It's not as if it's full of examples like that. But everybody can always give some examples like that, yeah, where you have potential ambiguity. Yeah, that's a good question. But coming back, so there are regional differences. Yeah. Are there also social differences? And that's an interesting point. Now, one thing, at least in the Flemish situation, one thing is that where you have certain social differences between the deaf children of deaf parents, or deaf people who've got deaf parents, or who come from a long deaf lineage, yeah? Those are regarded fairly highly in the deaf community. And then ones with hearing parents, especially if they have learned to sign later, are frequently regarded not as high. Yeah? So there might be some kind of social stratification. I'm not sure whether that's due to the language or whether it's due to general cultural awareness, general deaf awareness, general ease in communicating in the deaf community or not. I don't know whether it's simply the language or the language variety. Yeah? That has to do with that. But interestingly, when we did that study on standardization in Flemish Sign Language, so as I said, there are different regiolects, 5 different regiolects in Flanders for Flemish Sign Language, but there is no such thing as a standard Flemish Sign Language yet. It's developing, but it's not there yet. When we talk about Flemish Sign Language, it's sort of all of it together, sort of an umbrella term for all of the varieties. We talk about Flemish Sign Language. Now, we did a study in which we asked somebody from the five deaf persons from the 5 regiolects, so a deaf person from West Flanders, from East Flanders, etc., to give a news item as if he or she would be bringing the news, a news item, and telling them that this is something that was meant for national broadcast, to be broadcast everywhere in Flanders, so that everybody in Flanders could look at it. So we asked them to do this, and then we asked deaf people, do you feel that this variety, or one of the 5 varieties, which one of the 5 varieties is appropriate for being broadcast nationally? Which of the varieties would be appropriate for being broadcast nationally? So which of the varieties has the higher social status? Yeah? And interestingly, it was the one variety in which the signer had used a lot of mouthings. Mouthings are words, movements of the mouth in which the spoken words are said, are really said. So this is what I've been doing here, I think, all day, all evening. When I gave a sign, I've immediately also given you at the same time the spoken word, right? I mean, I've said sleep, yeah, sleep. I've used the spoken word and given you the sign as well. I could easily do this. You would understand me as well, but I mean, in a spoken language context, it's a bit strange not to speak at the same time. But this is what one of the signers had done consistently, had always given the mouthings. He didn't speak out loud, but he'd always given the mouthings. So by giving the mouthings, you get a blend of your non-manual part, your facial part. On the mouth, you can see the Dutch word, whereas on the hands and the rest of the facial, the non-manual part, clearly is a sign language. So that's a blend. So you wouldn't call that pure sign language, right? Because it's a blend. And interestingly, the majority would point that one out as the one that's more interesting for national television, for being broadcast on national television. Now, when we asked further, it was also due to understandability. They felt that understandability was higher if you also have the Dutch words accompanying it, because you don't always know all the signs from the other varieties. There might be regional signs that you don't know, and if you broadcast, you don't have the time to always give 4 or 5 signs. You just give one sign, and from your own region, and not everybody always knows this. And by adding the mouthing, that supports, because they all know Dutch as well, right? So that supports a little bit the understandability. So that might have been the issue, rather than social strategy. Because first we thought, wow, this is a very clear example of social stratification. If you add, if you blend, if you add mouthings, it becomes socially more acceptable, because this is the thing that you want on national television. Yeah? But I think we may have misjudged that. It might have been more understandability rather than, social stratification. So more research is needed. It's very interesting research, by the way, so if anybody wants to do something like that, it's very interesting research. Yes, at the back?
I was curious to know if you want to start learning the sign language, for example, at our age, 20, 21, and you don't have any relative that knows the sign language, is it possible, or does it take too long to learn it? And is it harder than learning like a new language from its root? I would say it's possible. It's like learning a new language. Now, we all know that the earlier you learn a new language in terms of grammar, the easier it is to learn the grammar. Yeah, there is a cutoff point at adolescence, more or less. If you learn the language, a second or a third language, before adolescence starts, we know that in terms of grammar, I'm talking about grammar now, in terms of grammar and phonology, producing the sounds as if you know the language very well, you reach a higher level of language proficiency. The lexicon is slower to develop. We also know that. For smaller children, the lexicon goes slower, or more slowly. For people who are older than that, the lexicon goes faster because you use your brain, and basically you're trained in learning things, right? So the lexicon goes a lot faster. But we know that in terms of phonology and in terms of grammar, you don't always attain full proficiency. So it is perfectly possible to do. It's the same for sign languages. It's perfectly possible to do that, but you may not use your hands fully proficiently like deaf people would do it. And especially, what's especially very difficult for hearing people is using the right facial expressions. What many hearing people do is having some kind of blank face and not daring to use a full facial expression. So not daring to go for and those things, right? Because we feel that's awkward. We're not trained in doing that. We're not raised in doing that. A deaf person would think that if you don't do that with your face, you sound as if you're very monotonous. You're saying the same language at them in a very monotonous intonation. That's more or less what you sound like. Yeah? Okay. Can you see my point? So by not using facial expressions as you should as a deaf person, it's perfectly understandable, only you sound very boring. Yep. Yes?
Would it be better or even possible for sign language to be taught in schools, kind of like a second language? So even hearing children with hearing parents, they just learn sign language so that in the future it makes it easier for the hearing community to communicate with the deaf community, and even probably prepare hearing parents for deaf children?
That's a very noble idea. It's something that many deaf people applaud. Yeah, there you go, see? It's something that many deaf people would really like, so it's a very noble idea. It does, in the States, for instance, I don't know whether you know this, in order to start at university in the United States of America, right? In order to start at a university, you need to show that you have proficiency in a second language. That can be any language. Obviously, English would be it's still the majority language in America. Spanish is the second most, claimed language for entrance into a university. American Sign Language is the third language. Yeah? So in the States, there are a good many hearing people who learn American Sign Language at school and who use American Sign Language as, this is my language proficiency that gives me entry into a university. I only know that in the States. I don't know it in any other country, unfortunately. But it's, the more people, the more hearing people know how to sign, the easier it is to communicate, obviously. Yeah? That's clearly, and maybe not necessarily because you might expect a deaf child. I mean, the chances are quite small that you'll get a deaf child. It's not as if there are, it's 1 in 1,000, more or less. Yeah, so it's not as if there are so many deaf children from hearing parents. But it's just something richer for yourself. I mean, you're richer as a person if you get to know another culture. If you're all students of English, maybe not all, but majority students of English, you all know that by studying English, you have access to a different type of culture. Well, it's the same here. If you know your local sign language, you have access to the local deaf community. And it's just so much richer for you as a person. So I am very much in favor of that. But it is possible that it might be a little bit utopian, but I'm personally very much in favor of it as well. There's a question here as well, yeah?
Sorry, I want to ask you a question which is maybe a little less linguistic, but deals more with the education. It took my attention when you mentioned that deaf schools are considered very important in terms of facilitating or enabling a child to learn sign language. And I was trying to accommodate this information in the context of Kosovo. In Kosovo, as a country that is aspiring EU integration, what we are trying to do has been to somehow embrace those inclusion policies and close deaf schools and place students and children from different kind of disabilities in the mainstream education. So what this information triggered somehow was a question: what would be the implications of putting a deaf child in the mainstream education in terms of enabling him to learn sign language?
Very good question. I had a set of slides still about deaf education, you see, history of deaf education. I'm not going to go through that because it would take me too far. But I think I need to tell you that I'm just going to give you a little bit of context before I'm going to answer your question, okay? The first deaf school, a public deaf school in the world was in France, in Paris, in 1760. That was organized by a priest, Charles Michel de l'Épée, quite well known in there you go, de l'Épée. That's his name sign. He started the first deaf school. He was a hearing person. The legend has it that he was a priest, and this is pre-French Revolution, right, 1760. At the time, priests had a very, very high standard in society. I mean, these were people that were highly respected, right? He was walking on the streets in Paris, and there were two small children, two girls playing with each other, and he said something to them. They didn't react. He said it again. They didn't react again. The mother suddenly saw that this priest addressed her daughters, and realized that her daughters hadn't replied, and apologized profusely because this priest, her daughters, hadn't replied to the priest. And she said, "My daughters are deaf. They haven't heard you. I'm really sorry about that." And the priest got very worried about this because he realized, as a priest, that the children would never, he thought, as a priest, that the children would never go to heaven because they would never have heard the word of God, and they would never have been raised religiously because nobody had been able to explain religion to them. So he thought, oh, I've got to do something about this. This is a legend, but we think there's probably a lot of truth in it. At least he thought, I need to do something about this. I need to raise deaf children religiously, because otherwise the gates of heaven are closed to them. So he started up a deaf school in France with donations from charities, from mainly the aristocracy in France, who gave money to set up this deaf school. It grew really fast, really, to a big school already. I think in about 5 years' time there were more than 100 pupils at a school. He also wanted to give them religious education, so he didn't really care about them learning how to speak, because in the past, deaf children, the education that they had was focused on learning how to speak. With a big group of children, there's no way that he could do this individually, and he wanted them to, I think he wants to give the microphone to the interpreter. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Thanks for coming.